Chris, thank you for the enlightening keynote. I would now like to shine a spotlight on some of the important topics that you touched in your keynote and get into the depth of those issues. Firstly, you spoke about third-party recognitions and sustainability certifications in the GRESB universe. And in that context, I want to ask you about this. So in Japan, REITs and asset management companies disclose sustainability certifications of their holdings. These are mostly rating systems from Japan, and none of them require operation phase performance data as a prerequisite. At Arc Japan, we support LEED version 4.1 O&M certification and have introduced products to provide operation phase recognition. In that context, what is going on with building certification scoring in GRESB, and how are the requirements and expectations going to change?
Great, that's a great question. I'm happy to jump into it. Can you advance to the next slide, and I'll use that to talk about the issue. So GRESB is changing. Let me say this way: the investor members of GRESB are changing their expectations for certification, and I could summarize that into 3 different areas. Each one is a bit different. First, with respect to new construction certifications, we are seeing a change in investor expectations. Today, limited partners in GRESB have very, very high expectations for certification. They are looking for near zero, net zero performance. They are already assuming resilience to physical climate risks, and they expect managers to be rigorously addressing social sustainability. The issue here is these expectations are in line with the very highest levels of certification. That may or may not be the case for any given project. The second one, as you mentioned, is that even more important than new construction, investors have put a premium on measured operational performance. And they believe that operational building certifications are faster, less expensive, and more relevant to their interests. And so there is pressure. At a minimum, investors want to see a clear and direct connection between design and operations. This is reflected in GRESB today. So I'll show you 2 different ways. One, new construction is weighted slightly less than operations. So operations are worth more than new construction. That's based on investor preference. And at the same time, investors have concerns about low quality or narrow certifications that are not rooted in performance. The final piece I'll convey is that all of these circumstances drove GRESB to establish new requirements for certifications. This is the chart right here. What you can see is that beginning this year, 2024, we effectively have instituted a discount rate so that the value of certifications declines over time. And that the decline in the value is different for different types of certifications. So the building design and construction certificate, which encompasses a range of things, the energy design, the site location, and so forth, is good in full for roughly 5 years. And then it depreciates out to 15 years, where it has a small remaining value indefinitely, speaking to the value of the site. The operations and maintenance certification is good in full through 5 years, and then it drops off very quickly. This reflects econometric analysis that shows something similar for, say, Energy Star, the value of Energy Star. And then interior design and construction certifications drop off the fastest. They begin to drop off at 3 years. So the bottom line is that certifications now have expiration dates in terms of their value in the assessment. Operational performance has the highest value but it begins to drop off after 5 years. And BD and C has a lower starting value, but it lasts a little bit longer. So I know that's a little bit complicated, but it does reflect a real change in the value of certifications and ratings going forward. I hope that gives you a little insight into the new rules that we've instituted this year.
Thank you, Chris. Clearly, the investors are moving towards prioritizing operational phase recognition. And for that, operational phase asset level data is important. However, direct meter to platform automation does not exist at this point in Japan. And the data collection process relies heavily on property managers and facility managers. What are your observations on that?
I'll just give you a quick observation here. First, yes, this is true. Operational phased asset data is increasingly important and becoming more so. At the same time, investors recognize that, and again, affirming what you said, the data collection process relies heavily on facility managers, and there is a recognition this is slow, expensive, and prone to error. And so it is. And so today, on a global basis, less than 50% of GRESB companies are using automated data connections, but those that are get a number of benefits. They get higher quality, they get a faster process, and they also get the ability to measure and track data on a year-over-year basis in new ways. So just affirming what you said, it is definitely more important. There's definitely a growth opportunity. And maybe one last thing, once people automate the process, they never go back. So that speaks to the benefits of the system, the benefits of automation.
Indeed. Automation aside, specifically for residential assets, tenant data is hard to obtain because it is restricted by privacy laws. Recently, utility consortiums in Japan have introduced a service that provides anonymized tenant data aggregated at the building level for a fee. Now, the jury is still out on the quality of such services, and the property managers are still reliant on manual data collection. So the data quality challenges persist. I'm curious about the data coverage status of various GRESB participants for different sectors and the residential sector specifically.
Great. Well, if you go to the next slide, perfect. Thank you very much. First, this is a global challenge for residential. This is not the struggle that the Japanese market is having with residential data access is not unique. It is shared around the world. The graph on your screen illustrates the nature of the problem. So if you look at Asia collectively, when it comes to data coverage, it is substantially above average. If you look at all asset classes together, so 90+% energy, 90+% GHGs and water, slightly lower for waste. However, when you look at the same region for residential, you see dramatically lower data coverage. So you see 34.8% for energy, slightly higher for greenhouse gases, and slightly higher for water and lower for waste. Either way, it is the level of data coverage for residential is 1/3 that of other categories. So residential is clearly the place to put our focus in terms of increasing data coverage, quality, and automation.
Thanks, Chris. Clearly, residential is a challenging asset class. Now, more broadly, for the operation phase, we see that investors focus on benchmarking energy intensity, operational carbon emissions, and climate risks. Few emphasize water and waste performance, and none are assessing health and well-being performance. Using Arc Japan, we are promoting acquisition of data for holistic sustainability performance, that is energy, water, waste, transportation, and human experience. How does GRESB view this theme?
We see an increasing first. We see the same priorities that you described. Investors have a long-standing interest in energy intensity and climate risk, no question, first. But we do see there are certain regions where water and waste are critical. I would actually look to our Australian colleagues and whatnot, where waste is a mature thing. But maybe more importantly, what we see going forward is interest in thematic investment strategies. Investors want to understand in a more granular way energy, water, waste, transportation, human experience. They'd like to be able to take them apart. They'd like to be able to design products and investment strategies around these different issues. And one indicator of that is we recently launched a social sustainability effort with IWBI, the International Well Building Institute, specifically to provide investors with the ability to disaggregate and look thematically at social sustainability, which includes human experience, as referenced in ARC. So the bottom line is, yes, today there is a narrow focus, but investors themselves have said they want more granular coverage to support a growing range of thematic investment strategies.
Thank you, Chris. Now I want to talk about a theme where solutions are yet to emerge. For example, there is a gap between the building codes, decarbonization pathways, and financing. At this point in time, following the building code alone is not sufficient to meet the present and future decarbonization mandates. Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. This first, again, you're correct. That is absolutely correct. It's also important, and in going deeper, it is important to recognize that today's building codes were not created to align with carbon budgets such as CREM. They were created for different reasons. They were created around cost effectiveness or operating costs or a variety of different metrics. And so they do result in more efficient buildings. But the depth of that efficiency is not aligned with emerging investor priorities for instance, Paris-aligned carbon budgets. And they may exclude things related to energy procurement. They may have different combinations of regulated and non-regulated loads. One way or the other, there is an increasing recognition that, at least from the purpose of global capital providers, they need to see operational performance in line with carbon budgets. And we are in a period of transition where codes are lagging behind the interests of the capital markets when it comes to operational performance. And so it is a time of tension. It is reflected in the graph that you have up right now that we showed earlier, where things like code and different programs are driving improvements over time. We see that in Japan, we see it in Australia, we see it in the US and the EU. However, those are not aligned with the urgency of what we appear to need to do to hit our 1.5 degree carbon budgets. So there will be an increasing priority. And last thing, those carbon budgets are based on measured real world performance, not the anticipated performance of design. So to your point earlier, in each case, we will need to emphasize real world performance measurement and ensure that code isn't just being designed for the carbon budget, but that the actual building delivers something closer to a carbon budget. And that's the transition we're in right now.
Right, Chris. And clearly, investors are earmarking some funds for ESG improvements. Largely speaking, sufficient finance is not being directed towards existing brown assets, and the market is still open for the emergence of real decarbonization strategies for green retrofits and green value up. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so this is my personal passion, and you're again absolutely correct. The history of our industry over the last decade we have provided preferred access to capital to the highest performing companies, and that has worked very well. For instance, companies such as Prologis, operating in Japan or operating in the US or around the world, they have been able to use green bonds to fund a green building program based on their superior performance. That's great. But that's not the same thing as investing in the brown to green transition. And as leaders like Mark Carney, formerly with the Bank of England, have told us, we need to go to the brown assets because that's where the carbon is. And so we need to create new mechanisms. So for me, this is one of the advantages of the Arc Japan approach with its lead readiness. We are able to look at assets that are not yet ready for certification, but that could be ready with investment. So that's an example of a tool that, in that case, lead readiness or an ARC score, the ability to understand what could happen with additional investment and then to track that improvement over time. So the bottom line is we have done very well providing preferred capital for the best. We need to create new ways to flow capital into the retrofit brown to green transition, and then to hold those companies accountable for delivering on that investment with measured performance.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for your remarks, and thank you for the keynote today. I think it was very useful for all the attendees.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm honored to have been with you, and if individuals would like to contact me for any follow-up, I'm happy to be in touch. Thank you again.